How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to 3 Agree Ministry. Today, the videos finally start to get real. If you've noticed my last two videos, the first video just being my story, the second video being a logical reason of why I was a deist rather than a full-blown atheist or even agnostic. If you guys didn't watch that video, I'm going to leave a link to that video in the description of this video. But today, we're finally going to get into why I chose Christianity and why I feel the way that I feel. I do want to say a couple of things. I'm uploading my videos in a very specific way on purpose. I want to kind of take you down the same route that I went down. So, a month from now, we'll be getting into deeper, more like Bible study, more Christian side of the channel. But for now, I'm just trying to work my way up. So one thing I do want to say is I do not want to disrespect any religion. I do want to make it very clear that I am a faith over atheism person. And in my journey, I actually went and looked through so many different faiths instead of just going directly to one. And ultimately, it led me to Jesus. And I just want to explain to you guys kind of how that transition happened for me. I want to try to keep this video not too long, so there's going to be so much I want to talk about, but I'm going to have to go super fast. So guys, bear with me. Let's get into the video. Okay, let's get straight into it. So about 9 months ago, I decided I wanted to finally look into the idea of this God that previously I've stated. I believed in the idea of God, but can I come to know him? Is he personable? And what does the world have to say about this? Because unfortunately, we don't have outside of this world sources to try to grip and understand the concept of God. And for me, having such a strong feeling that human life is so valuable and such a strong want and need to know that there is something beyond this, I came to God. And now, for the first time, I decided I wanted to look into who God was, if I could find anything reliable to find out who God was. And the way I did that is I started from the beginning. I like to use that word. I looked up all of the major world religions, and after, again, I don't want to disrespect any religion, and there's so much that I can say and give a lot more reasons, but I want to try to make this video quick. I did a lot of study on a lot of different religions, but I came down to the same major world religions that the majority of the world today go for. And those ones being Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam. Those were the 5 major world religions that I decided had some form of credibility, in the sense of, if there's this many people that believe in this, there's got to be something to it, right? So I wanted to go in and search with an open mind for truth, and I was willing to take any of those 5 paths. I want to make that clear. It wasn't just me going straight into Jesus. It was actually the opposite. I just went straight into the idea of God. And where that began me was with Judaism. Judaism, as of today, it's only about 15.7 million people. So it's actually one of the smaller religions of today, because most Jews throughout time converted over into Christianity. At one point, this was kind of the dominant religion next to the pagan religions and some Egyptian myths that were going on. But the idea of a personable God, it kind of came from Judaism, from what I was able to understand. And I started there. I figured that this was one of the oldest religions in the world, that one as well as Hinduism. And I decided I'm just going to start from the beginning. So I started with the Jews. And what was interesting reading the Jews, like Judaism, is I didn't realize this. And this just goes to show you guys how educated I was on scripture. Like, not at all. Haven't read it. Never read the Bible. Never read any of it. So when I realized that Judaism is directly linked with modern day Christianity, it kind of brought me into it. That's interesting. So Judaism obviously diverged at the concept of Jesus being the Messiah or not being the Messiah. So Judaism was an interesting route, and we'll get more into Judaism because there's so much more to talk about Judaism when we're talking about Christianity. But it kind of led me there. And what's interesting is I actually didn't know this thing called Abrahamic faith. This just goes to show how uneducated I really was in this. I thought Christianity, Judaism, and Islam were three completely different, unrelated religions. Until I started to research, it took me 2 minutes to realize that they're all Abrahamic religions, which all relate back to the Torah, which is the Old Testament, the first 5 books. And so, obviously, knowing that they're the three of the biggest major world religions all relate to this one trunk, that one already kind of got me interested in, well, let's figure this one out, because for obvious reasons. But I didn't just go there immediately, okay? I went to Judaism, researched that, found out a bunch of why Jews are different from Christians and why they're different from Islam and why all the three view the other the way that they do. So much research, and we can make more in-depth videos on that exact research, but again, I'm trying to get through this. So I like Judaism. The Old Testament was something that I struggled with, the book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Some of the stuff that's in those books, if you read it without, I guess I'm speaking ahead, but if you read it without Jesus context, it's very interesting books. And it was more of just like, okay, so this guy built a boat and all the animals got on it. That don't sound very real. And then you get into the, okay, this guy split the sea. That doesn't sound very real. So I kind of moved on. And again, this was just me going in as a deist, agnostic, skeptic. So I kind of moved on from Judaism. But I did learn a ton during that research. I went to Hinduism, which was next. Hinduism is one of the biggest religions. 1.2 billion people in this world consider themselves to be Hindus. And what was really interesting is when I went into these researches of God, I come from a conservative background. I tend to lean conservative in a lot of my beliefs, and I'm definitely a facts over feelings type person. And if you can't give me historical grounds to what you believe in when it comes to this idea of God, something that meaningful, if you can't give me historical roots, then unfortunately, me being a skeptic, I'm just not going to be able to follow it. Not necessarily that that's what happened with Hinduism, but what was interesting is even Hindu scholars that are scholars of the religion disagree and don't know if Krishna, which is their god, ever actually was here thousands and thousands of years ago. They don't even actually agree that he existed. And the earliest documents that talk about Krishna and the Hindu faith actually don't really appear until the 12th century for us today. That's the 1100s. And to think that this happened thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years ago, and we're barely getting these things in the 11th century, I was immediately skeptical. And and again, I don't want to disrespect any religions, but the idea of the sun god and all these other things, it just, like I said, I'm just going to be blunt, didn't click with me. But it was interesting reading about Krishna, and we'll get into that too. Then there was another one, Buddhism. About 535 million people worldwide are Buddhists, and I actually really liked Buddhism when I looked into it. The argument is, who is Buddha? Did he exist? And the problem in history is that Buddha, he could have been born in an over 2,000 year period. People can't really narrow down when Buddha was actually here. 2,000 year period. And in the end, I read that although I like Buddhism in their teachings, their theology is basically that they don't believe in a God. They just believe in people be reincarnated until they reach true enlightenment. And that to me didn't resonate with me because there's essentially no God in Buddhism. So I put that one to the side. Then you get into Christianity. The biggest religion in the world, 2.5 billion people in the world are Christians. And there's got to be a reason for that. There's got to be a reason for that. And when I started doing my studies of Christianity, obviously the very first thing you think of is this man, Jesus Christ. Some guy who existed 2,000 years ago. Pretty big deal. So I started there. I said, what's the historical backing for this guy even existing in the first place, right? Did Jesus even exist? And when I did all of my studies, which we could do 3 to 10 million videos on just my studies on Jesus, historically, again, all of these things that I'm looking into are historically, and you realize that we have writings that date within 100 years of his death. We have writings that talk and prophesy about him from the Jewish texts that date older than Jesus. And to see all of these grounds in history, the cool thing I like about the gospel, the Bible, when I was reading about it in text, is that these are actually historical documents. They're not just some guy sat down at one time and wrote all of this. These were actually little bits and pieces discovered over time that matched up perfectly with what the early churches were teaching, with what Jesus himself was teaching. So at first, my first thought was, wow, there's a lot of historical based evidence that this guy at least existed. So what's interesting is when you read into, okay, even historians have agreed that there's 3 things that we can come to know are about as certain as any historical event can be, even from the non-Christian skeptics, that Jesus at least existed. Jesus of Nazareth existed. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. That's a historical thing that we can study. And then there's that his believers, his followers believed, whether it happened or not, they believed that they had not just seen an empty tomb, but saw the risen Christ himself after death. So again, this is what's being taught in the gospel while Jesus is alive. So there was so much history pointing back to the idea that, okay, Jesus existed, he was crucified, and his believers believed these things. And to me, that was the very first religion of all the ones that I studied that I was like, holy cow. And you guys, like I said, I can make so many videos on just the historical evidence for Jesus that we would have to take way too long for this video. We're already at 11 minutes and I don't want to go too crazy with this video. But Christianity immediately stuck with me on at least historical backing. And then 600 years after Christianity, Islam was born. And Islam was the second of my studies that you could tell had a historical backing. You know, the Prophet Muhammad, claimed to be a prophet and had some pretty miraculous works done as far as, writing the books. At least that's what, the Muslims will say. But to me, there was no actual miracles mentioned in the Quran. Now, the hadiths come later, and they do mention some forms of miracles that happened, but in the Quran itself, there wasn't necessarily miracles that came with it. But we do know that Muhammad definitely existed. There's no doubt about it. He definitely said these things and talked about these things, and his followers definitely believed that he was getting revelations from God. So again, I narrowed it down to those 2 religions, if I'm being completely honest. I narrowed it down to Christianity and Islam as far as what does history give me any reason to believe? Because if Islam, Christianity didn't have that history backed, the history backing it, I wouldn't have found any religion. I would have thrown all 5 of them away. But fortunately for me, I found 2 religions that seem to have historical backings. So the question was, what's the major difference between Islam and Christianity? And it all comes back to Jesus. Islam believes that Jesus was the Messiah, but he was not God. He was not the Son of God. And that he was just a prophet, but he will come back a second time. And so they were pretty close on the idea of Jesus. So again, my conclusion studying Christianity was that Jesus existed. Now I got to see what's the best historical evidence to find out what Jesus himself, when he was here, said. And when you realize that the gospel, Revelation, other books, record what Jesus taught, it was clear to me that assuming that these gospels are what they are preserved, again, we'll get into that Jesus was a lot more than just a prophet. And as a matter of fact, Jesus himself, without saying I am God, claimed to be God so many times. And it wasn't until he died and the Spirit of truth was put into us that we could see, obviously, that Jesus was God, or at least that Jesus himself claimed to be God. And then, Islam comes around and says, nope, he's none of that. God is not a father in any sense. Jesus didn't actually pray that way. He didn't actually say these things. And so when I started doing research on that, what was interesting is I found that every single religion points to Jesus. And all these other Jesus parallel religions, this is the exact story that all of these other Jesus parallel religions say. They say, oh, yeah, Jesus was real. Because that's the conclusion I came to. I was focused on this Jesus guy. Jesus was real, and he taught all these things, and the scriptures were good. But the scriptures have changed. They've been manipulated, and we have the right way. What's interesting is there are countless religions that claim that the Bible and the Gospels have been tampered with in some form or fashion, and that they have the right way. But none of them are remotely the same. They're all pretty vastly different in their belief. And the idea of this Trinity is what really starts to kill these other people who are trying to believe in Jesus. But then, you read and you say the Old Testament, which Jesus affirmed. The Old Testament says that there's one God. God is one. How could there be a Trinity? How could God be three in one? And that led me down my second rabbit hole for our next video, and we'll finally get into some scripture. But what I came down to was that I believed that this Jesus person existed, so I looked into the religions that believed in Jesus. Judaism is an interesting one, because either you are a Messianic Jew and you believe in Jesus, and therefore you're essentially an ethnic Jew that's Christian, or you don't believe in Jesus. And what's very interesting, like I said earlier, is every single major world religion points to Jesus in some way. Messianic Jews say that Jesus is the Messiah and is God. Rabbinical Jews just deny Jesus altogether. Hindus have drawn direct parallels Jesus to Krishna, and some Hindus even believe that Jesus was divine. Crazy? The Buddhists believe that Jesus was an enlightened teacher and Jesus reached enlightenment. And Islam believes that Jesus was the Messiah. So all of these religions point to Jesus. But you know what Jesus says himself? He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. So all of these people point to this guy. Maybe we should listen to this guy, the one that everybody points to. And the claims he makes are extraordinary, and it's hard to deny. And when I really got into it, I narrowed it down to Christianity and Islam. And I do not want to offend any of my Muslim friends, brothers. I don't want to offend any of them and disrespect their prophet. But what I did is, out of respect for Muhammad, I'm not going to go into details because, again, I want to be respectful on my channel. I don't want to be one of those people. But I looked at, Muhammad versus Jesus Christ. Who would I rather follow? I looked at the life, the teachings of these two people, and overwhelmingly, you guys, Jesus came to the forefront. For me, overwhelmingly. So I follow Jesus, and I believe that he is who he says he is. And I believe that the Gospels and the Scriptures have been preserved. The Scriptures themselves say that they will be preserved, and they will be preserved. The Quran, which came to confirm and be a guardian over my Bible, confirms my Bible. And to me, it was overwhelming. I was going to be a follower of Christ. And now I just had to come to know him, and how can I understand him? And oh boy, did that lead me down a significant other rabbit hole. And we'll get into that going forward on our channels. But you guys, Jesus, if Jesus is who he says he is, all of us need to listen. And when you realize that his actions, although his words were divine, his actions spoke louder. And actions do speak louder than words. And Jesus says, if you don't believe me off of the things I say, believe on me because of the things that I've done. Look at the works I've done. No other person has done this. No other prophet was born a virgin. These things cannot. All signs point to Jesus, guys. And I was able to finally see that. And then I finally was able to dive deep into my research on Jesus, Christianity, and what it was. And then that's where I went into an entire another whirlwind of where I became a whole bunch of different sects. I was oneness for a while. I was thinking I was a heretic. I couldn't necessarily believe in the Trinity or come to understand it. And then the more I searched, the more I believed, the more I wanted, and the more that I genuinely researched, the Trinity is the only logical conclusion of the Bible. And it's a beautiful thing. And that will be our next video. We'll discuss the Trinity in my eyes. And again, I'm not a teacher. I'm not going to come out here in a professional manner and try to just boom, boom, boom. We're just going to talk about it like friends. I appreciate you guys. And that is how I became a Christian. I'll see y'all next time. Peace.